Do you like unsolved mysteries? You are in the right place, because today we are going to talk once again of that peer-reviewed article signed by astronomer Beatriz Villarroel, where she suggests that strange objects were flying over the skies during military exercises involving nuclear bombs, right? These objects that precede the launch of satellites. So, what would these objects be? So she published these articles. They were peer-reviewed, they were validated. And now the scientists are taking this material and reanalyzing it, trying to see if it makes sense, trying to find some explanations. So, the folks here at Live Science gathered some of these expert opinions regarding this article by Villarroel. So we are going to comment about this in today's video. And the other mysterious topic we're going to discuss will be 13 Atlas, right? As I said, I'll bring daily updates until this comet leaves the solar system. And we have yet another proposal to try to explain the antitail of this object, right? Suddenly, would there be several mini objects in front of 13 Atlas that generate this antitail? Let's try to understand this proposal to explain it. That antitail there, which is quite strange compared to 13 Atlas. So these are the topics that we are going to address in today's video, my friends. And if you like about my work, if you want to support in some way and don't know how, just leave a comment and also leave a like, which helps a lot for YouTube to understand that this video is relevant and spread it to more and more people in this digital county. And also subscribe to the channel, which helps a lot too. That way you'll get notifications whenever I post a new video here. So you can subscribe, leave a comment, and leave a like. That's already helping a lot, okay? Now folks, come on then. Let's try to understand this crazy universe, this nuts universe. Let's begin then with Beatriz Villarroel. Beatriz, my wife's namesake, who is also named Beatriz. So what exactly are the Live Science folks doing here this time on this topic? Well, they do a recap here at the beginning of everything that happened, which I think is worth it to bring, because many people are just dropping into this topic. Even to remember what she is proposing, here is Beatriz Villarroel, right? So, they say here that more than 70 years ago, astronomers from the Palomar Observatory in California photographed several flashes, right? Which are star-like points of light that appeared, and they disappeared in less than an hour, even before the launch of the first satellite, which was Sputnik 1, launched by the Soviets. So they say that recently researchers reanalyzed these historical photographic plates used between 99 and 58, and so they identified thousands of transient events in hundreds of nights, right? These transient events are these lights here that what is here in the image and then it isn't there anymore. And it couldn't be a supernova because they would appear and disappear. They were flashes. A supernova, it is constant, it has light, the star shines for a while, it gives a bright flash, then its brightness gradually decreases. This takes from weeks to months, so it couldn't be a supernova. So what would these objects be? They also weren't satellites, because the Stuspet was launched much later. So there's the mystery. Well, they discovered a significant statistical correlation. The flashes were 45% more likely to happen in the 24 hours following nuclear tests in the Cold War, and they increased 8.5% whenever there was a historical report of UFO sightings. Right? UAP, UFO, however you prefer. So when there were UFO sightings, there was a higher incidence of these objects, of these phenomena. Here, look, here's another one. A compilation of these objects appearing and disappearing. Some of these flashes exhibited strange patterns, linear alignments, or multiple points that the authors of the study say are difficult to explain only by variable stars, meteors, or instrumental defects. So, here is a summary of what is being proposed in this peer-reviewed article signed by the astronomer Beatriz Villarroel. Now we're going to get to the part here of the Live Science text, where they bring here the opinion of the experts on this article, right? Some scientists warn about the limitations of the data. The plates are old, subject to dust, scratches, imperfections in the emulsion, or artifacts generated during scanning, which can generate false positives. That is a point they raised in the text here from Live Science. The supposed lines or groupings may be coincidences, registration errors, or random alignments common in old astronomical photographs. Then there is an alignment here that I set aside right here. Look, these alignments. The very historical record of UAP sightings is considered of variable validity. That is, the researchers have no way to guarantee that each report is reliable. So Live Science has here A. They consolidated some opinions and reached a provisional conclusion about this analysis of Dr. Beatriz Villarroel's articles. The new studies do not bring proof that there were artificial objects, possibly extraterrestrial, and everything else orbiting the Earth before the space age, but it reopens the debate in a scientific way. Data suggests that something unusual was recorded, in fact, at times and under conditions that coincide with nuclear tests and reports of UAPs. The authors ask for new, more rigorous exams, including a forensic one of the original plates, right, to try to test these hypotheses. So the article here from Evo is about to arrive. Look, he's here, Evo. The article here from Live Science, it's not refuting, it's not saying that Vill's article is wrong, right? They are just bringing up some points to try to investigate. But they admit that it's here, look, it's in the title. They admit that it's something that is not easy to explain, right? That he is susceptible to errors. The plates may have some alteration for which I will be cited, which is why they want to perform forensic examinations of the material. But they say, yes, there's something strange happening in this article. So what's going to happen now? They're going to investigate, right? They're going to try to investigate. It would be interesting to test these days to see if it happens these days too, right? It wasn't only in the decade of the, that they were related to nuclear tests, right? They had favorable conditions, or at least conditions where the incidence of these phenomena was more frequent, right? So we have to study this correlation. But I'm going to leave the link down here in the description of this article where they bring, I made a kind of a summary, easy overview here of what is being said. But if you want to see it later in more detail, it's down here in the description so you can see the position of these other scientists. But as I said, they are not refuting anything. They are saying that something strange really happened. Maybe the explanation isn't aliens, right? But they're trying to see what the other explanations would be, the other hypotheses, so they want to test them. So there's Beatriz Villa and her transient objects. Now let's talk about Evo. And yes, it's Evo who brings the text here on Medium, right? I will leave it down here in the description, where he tries to explain to bring at least one more hypothesis to try to understand. What are, the antitail of 13 Atlas, and based on, this article is written based on. In recent post-perihelion photos, right, which is after the passage of 13 Atlas near the Sun. This very image that you are seeing was taken on November 22nd. That's what they say. He starts by mentioning here the so-called teardrop shape of the 13 Atlas, right? This image here, it really looks like a drop, doesn't it? Then he says that post-perihelion images show an elongated coma pointed towards the Sun. That is unusual. Normally the tails point the other way. There have been, some scientists who said that in the 60s there was a comet that also had an antitail very similar to what we see in 13 Atlas in the 60s. Well, it's not impossible, but it's uncommon. Then he also talks about the non-gravitational acceleration that continues strong, right? He says here that the 13 Atlas is experiencing an extra force that pushes it away from the Sun. This force follows exactly the same. The same one follows exactly the same law of gravity and decreases with the square of the distance, right? And what happens is it had a change in its speed, due to the ejection of material from 13 Atlas itself. And this ejection of materials, these jets that it is expelling, made a small change in the trajectory of 13 Atlas, and it has been moving away from the Sun, right? Here he also talks about the curious consequence of this extra force. If there are small objects around and they don't feel this extra acceleration, the result would be that they would get closer to the Sun than the main object, right? And generating that appearance of a tail, what is he talking about here? The 13 Atlas had this acceleration. Right, non-gravitational, in other words, generated by the gases that it is expelling. Except that the antitail reappeared after the perihelion. So he is saying that the main object, which would be the nucleus, moved away from these small objects that generated this anti-tail. So the objects were not affected by this extra force. That's what he's saying here. Then he says that a swarm of 1 trillion tiny objects containing only 0.1% of the mass of 13 Atlas already would produce 100 times more area of reflective area than the main body. This matches a brightness seen by Hubble in July 2025. The image is this one here, this brighter part here. It's the anti-tail because the sun is in that direction, right? Then he says, right, that a swarm of 1 trillion tiny objects containing 0.1% of the mass of the 13 Atlas would already produce 100 times more reflective area than the main body, right? Then he explains why the anti-tail appears both before and after the perihelion. So he says here that if these swarms really exist, its extension would always be proportional to the distance from the sun. For this reason, the structure would have practically the same shape, both when approaching and when moving away. In astronomy, there are some explanations for anti-tails, right? As I already said, it's not something exclusive to 13 Atlas, you know? And one of the most used explanations by scientists is actually quite consistent, right? Here you have the anti-tail and the conventional tail. Yeah, that aligns pretty well with David Loeb's proposal here, right? Scientists say that anti-tails on comets are often generated because of heavy particles, right? That are not as light as conventional comet tail dust. So when these particles are heavier, they are not pushed by the solar wind. So it has a tail with the lighter dust, which is the common tail that we see. In the opposite direction in relation to the sun, and there are these heavier particles that are not easily pushed by the solar wind and they stay there. Right, apparently, for those who are watching, in front of the comet in relation to the sun. So there's this explanation from astronomy, and there's also the question of perspective, right? Sometimes the tail, it's pushed in the anti-solar direction, right? But depending on the angle that the comet is in relation to the observer here on Earth, we will see this tail extending through space, won't we? And depending on the angle at which we are viewing this comet, this tail might end up curving, and we see the tip of this tail in front of the comet in relation to the sun. So depending on the angle, we end up seeing that, right? I even gave the example earlier of the train coming towards you, right? If it's coming in a straight line, you'll only see its front. If it's coming around a bend, you see its front, but the rest of it is curving. So there are several issues like that involving geometry. This issue of heavier dust, that they would explain, right, this anti-tail. So Evelop brought up this question of the particles, right? And he poses the question, what would these particles be, right? But there's an explanation in astronomy, you know, in the great literature of astronomy that explains that the anti-tail can often be heavier dust. But we will continue following everything that happens with the 1300, won't we? Very soon it is approaching Earth. Right, approaching, right? 200 million kilometers, right? It will be the closest approach. This is on December 19th, right? And if there are new images of it from this approach, I'll bring them here for you. So you don't miss anything, subscribe to the channel. All right, everyone? So that's it. I'm going to wrap up here with this video. Just a reminder, if you want to check out my literary work, speaking of science, you can buy my books, Atoms, Black Hole, and Where We Are in 200, right? These are books that many people give as a gift to people who don't yet have much knowledge of astronomy because they are accessible books. Easily accessible, right? It has a very simple language, so you can give it to a child or to people who don't know anything about astronomy. She is a complete layperson, so these books are kind of introductory books. So if you want to check out my work, there's a link down below in the description for you to buy it, all right? So that's it. I'll be signing off here. A big hug for you all. And that's it.